When a billionaire's public tantrum over a French menu threatened to end my career, I responded in a language he couldn't understand. Little did I know that defiance would spark a dining room showdown with consequences far beyond my paycheck. The restaurant where I worked, Le Ciel Étoile, was the kind of place that had more forks on the table than most people had in their entire kitchen drawer. It was a temple of hushed tones, crisp white linens, and the soft clinking of expensive crystal. The air itself smelled of money, a subtle blend of truffle oil, old leather, and a perfume you couldn't buy in a department store. I was a literature student, paying my way through a degree in French classics by serving coq au vin to people who couldn't pronounce it. I was good at my job. I could balance 3 plates on one arm, recite the daily specials with a poetic flair, and maintain a serene, pleasant smile even when a customer was asking me, for the 3rd time, if our water was ethically sourced. Most nights were a predictable ballet of quiet efficiency, but that night, the music stopped the moment he walked in. His name was Arthur Sterling. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. To me, he was just quote, _2, a storm cloud in a $1,000 suit that didn't quite hide the belligerent paunch underneath. He didn't walk so much as bulldoze his way through the restaurant with a small entourage of nervous-looking men and 2 women who glittered with an almost desperate amount of jewelry. He didn't wait to be seated. He pointed at the best table in the house, the one by the panoramic window overlooking the city, and simply claimed it. Our host, a timid boy named Leo, practically tripped over himself trying to keep up. I drew the short straw. My manager, David, gave me a look that was equal parts apology and warning. "Be on your best behavior, Sarah," he murmured. "That's the asterisk Arthur Sterling. Tech billionaire, owns half the city." "Great," I muttered under my breath, grabbing the menus. "Let's hope he owns a dictionary for please and thank you." The vibe at table 7 was toxic. Mr. Sterling held court, his voice a grating baritone that sliced through the restaurant's delicate ambiance. He wasn't talking. He was broadcasting. His companions laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, their eyes darting around to see who was watching their powerful benefactor. When I approached, he didn't even look at me. He just waved a dismissive hand, a massive gold watch glinting on his wrist. "Water, and make it quick. We're important people." I plastered on my professional smile. "Of course, sir, still or sparkling." He finally turned his head, his eyes a pair of cold, polished stones. He looked at my name tag, then back at my face, a small, cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Whatever's wet, sweetheart, don't overthink it." The volcano that simmers in the gut of every service worker began to bubble. I just nodded, my smile feeling like cracking porcelain, and went to get the water. For the next 20 minutes, it was a masterclass in entitlement. He snapped his fingers to get my attention. He sent back the breadbasket because the crust wasn't, and I quote, quote, 10 when he tapped it. He complained that the ambient lighting was quote, 11 . With every interaction, he seemed to go out of his way to remind me that I was just the help, a temporary obstacle between him and his gratification. Then came the menus. Le Ciel Étoile prided itself on authenticity. The menu was written in elegant, cursive French, with subtle English descriptions in a smaller font beneath each item. It was part of the experience, the romantic illusion of being whisked away to a Parisian bistro. I'd seen people struggle with it before, but they usually laughed it off, asked for help. It was a chance for connection, for me to share my passion for the food and the language. Not Mr. Sterling. He stared at the menu for a full 5 minutes, his face growing redder and redder, his scowl deepening into a grotesque mask of fury. His sycophants watched him, their own smiles faltering, sensing the impending eruption. I was standing a few feet away, ready to take their order, when he finally slammed the heavy leather-bound menu down on the table. The sound cracked through the restaurant like a gunshot. Every diner turned. The quiet chatter ceased. You could hear a pin drop. Quote, 12, he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden, shocked silence. He jabbed a thick finger at the elegant script. Quote, 13, all eyes were on me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. David was already scurrying over from the host stand, his face pale with panic. Mr. Sterling saw me standing there and locked his gaze on me, a predator singling out its prey. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 14. Underscore, underscore, he snarled, pointing directly at me. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 15, underscore, underscore. His companions shrunk in their seats. The women looked at their plates, mortified. The entire room was frozen. A captive audience to his public tantrum. He wasn't just complaining, he was performing an act of humiliation, with the restaurant as his stage and me as his unwilling co-star. My training, my instincts, everything screamed at me to apologize, to fetch the manager, to placate the angry billionaire. But as I stood there, under the glare of his contempt and the pitying stares of 100 strangers, something inside me snapped. The professional waitress disappeared, and the French literature major, who had spent years studying the language of Molière and Hugo, who loved its beauty and precision, took her place. I took a slow, deliberate breath, looked Arthur Sterling dead in the eye, and prepared to answer him, not in the language he demanded, but in the one he had just so publicly insulted. A stillness fell over me. It was the calm clarity that comes when you've already fallen off the cliff and are just waiting to hit the bottom. My smile, the fake waitress smile, melted away. In its place was something quieter, more authentic. I met his furious gaze, and in a voice that was clear, steady, and impeccably accented, I began to speak. Monsieur, avec tout le respect que je vous dois, I started, my tone formal and exceedingly polite. Asterisk, sir, with all due respect. The words floated into the silent dining room like soap bubbles, beautiful and fragile. Sterling's face contorted in confusion. He clearly didn't understand a word, but he understood the defiance in my posture, in the directness of my gaze. I continued, my voice never rising, maintaining a professional, almost gentle cadence. Si menu est une expression de la cuisine et de la culture que nous célébrons ici, c'est le cœur de notre restaurant. Les descriptions en anglais sont fournies par courtoisie pour ceux qui pourraient avoir besoin d'un peu d'aide. Asterisk, this menu, is an expression of the cuisine and the culture we celebrate here. It is the heart of our restaurant. The English descriptions are provided as a courtesy for those who might need a little assistance. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw David, my manager, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. His hands were clasped in front of him, as if in prayer, his face as white as the tablecloths. I ignored him. My focus was entirely on the bloated crimson face of the billionaire. Un homme de votre stature, un homme du monde, comprendra sûrement l'importance de respecter la langue d'autrui, n'est-ce pas? Ou peut être que la richesse ne peut acheter ni la classe, ni la curiosité intellectuelle. Asterisk. A man of your stature, a man of the world, would surely understand the importance of respecting the language of another, would he not? Or perhaps wealth can buy neither class nor intellectual curiosity. The final sentence was delivered with the softest of tones, almost a whisper, but it was sharpened to a razor's edge. I held his gaze for a beat longer, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and said, Je peux vous prendre un moment pour décider, ou je peux vous réciter les descriptions en anglais si vous le préférez. Asterisk, I can give you a moment to decide, or I can recite the English descriptions for you if you prefer. Silence. Utter, deafening silence. Mr. Sterling's jaw worked silently, his face a thunderous mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He hadn't understood the precise words, but he had understood the tone perfectly. He knew he'd been insulted with an elegance he could never hope to match. What did you just say to me? He growled, his voice low and dangerous. What was that gibberish? David finally found his feet and rushed to the table. Mr. Sterling, please, I am so sorry, so deeply sorry for my employee's behavior. It is unacceptable. He turned to me, his eyes wide with terror and fury. Sarah, what do you think you're doing? Apologize to the gentleman this instant. But Sterling wasn't interested in an apology. He was interested in destruction. He stood up, knocking his chair back with a loud clatter. He was shorter than I expected, but twice as wide, a pillar of pure menace. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 20, underscore, underscore. He boomed, his voice once again filling the entire room. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 21, underscore, underscore. He jabbed that thick finger at David. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 22, underscore, underscore. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. David wilted. All the fight went out of him. He looked at me, his expression a miserable mix of fear and resignation. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 23, underscore, underscore, he whispered, his voice cracking. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 24, underscore, underscore. My heart plummeted into my stomach. My tuition, my rent, my future. It was all evaporating in the heat of this man's ego. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, some filled with pity, some with morbid curiosity. I had stood up for myself, for my love of a language, and this was the price. I nodded slowly, unable to speak, a bitter taste filling my mouth. My grandstand had lasted all of 2 minutes, but as I turned to leave, a new voice cut through the tension. It was a woman's voice, cool and crystalline, with a faint, unplaceable European accent. I don't think that will be necessary. Everyone turned towards a corner table. An older woman, perhaps in her late 60s, was sitting alone. She was impeccably dressed in a simple but clearly expensive silk blouse, her silver hair styled in an elegant chignon. She hadn't said a word all night, but now she was looking at Arthur Sterling with an expression of profound disappointment, as if observing a toddler throwing a tantrum. She placed her napkin deliberately on the table beside a glass of wine and rose slowly to her feet. All the power, all the attention in the room shifted from the blustering billionaire to this graceful, composed woman. She fixed Arthur Sterling with a calm, penetrating gaze. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 26, underscore, underscore, she said, her voice carrying easily through the silent room. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 27, underscore, underscore, Arthur Sterling turned his furious, bloated face toward the woman. It was a sight to behold. A man used to being the gravitational center of every room suddenly finding another sun in his orbit. He clearly had no idea who she was, and his arrogance wouldn't allow for the possibility that she mattered. "And who the hell are you?" he snarled, gesturing dismissively. "His mother? I don't need a translator. I need this little smart mouth fired, and I need it done 5 minutes ago." The woman smiled, a cool, unbothered expression that seemed to infuriate Sterling even more. "No," she said, her voice remaining perfectly level. "I am not her mother. I am simply a patron who, unlike yourself, appreciates both fine dining and basic human decency. As for what she said," she paused, taking a deliberate step away from her table and into the center aisle. Every person in the restaurant was leaning forward now, hanging on her every word. I stood frozen by the table, a spectator at my own execution, which had suddenly turned into a bizarre piece of public theater. "She began by addressing you with respect, monsieur," the woman explained, her eyes still locked on Sterling. She then calmly explained that the menu's format is an integral part of the restaurant's identity and culture. "A celebration, if you will," Sterling scoffed. "A celebration of being unreadable." The woman's smile tightened ever so slightly. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 35, underscore, underscore. Her voice dropped a fraction, taking on a conspiratorial tone that drew everyone in closer. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 36, underscore, underscore. She looked directly at Sterling, her gaze unwavering. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 37, underscore, underscore. A collective gasp, soft but audible, rippled through the dining room. Several people at nearby tables tried and failed to hide their smirks. The full, unvarnished translation of my insult, laid bare for all to hear, was somehow even more devastating than the original. Sterling's face cycled through a series of colors, from a blotchy red to a pale, clammy white. He looked like a bull who had charged at a matador's cape, only to find a brick wall behind it. "She called me classless?" he stammered, his voice losing its booming quality, shrinking into something reedy and incredulous. "Among other things," the woman confirmed with a slight, elegant shrug. But the delivery was, you must admit, impeccable. One of Sterling's gaudily dressed companions, a woman who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, her voice shrill with indignation. Quote, 41, that seemed to snap him out of his stupor. The rage returned, hotter than before, fueled now by public humiliation. He turned his glare from the elegant woman back to my manager, David, who looked as if he was about to faint. Quote, 42, Sterling bellowed, his voice cracking with fury. Quote, 43, David wrung his hands, his face a mess of panic. Quote, 44, his pleas were drowned out by Sterling's continued tirade. It was pure chaos. People were starting to whisper loudly. Some were even pulling out their phones, no doubt eager to capture the public meltdown of a notorious billionaire. And then, the woman spoke again, her voice cutting through the noise like a silver bell. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Arthur." The use of his first name was a shock. It was so familiar, so casual. It stopped Sterling mid-rant. He stared at her, his mouth hanging slightly open. How do you know my name?" The woman walked slowly towards him, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She stopped just a few feet away, close enough that he could no longer shout over her. The entire restaurant held its breath. "Oh, I know a great deal about you, Arthur," she said, her voice now laced with a cold, hard edge that hadn't been there before. Quote, 48. Sterling's jaw snapped shut. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking pasty and sick. He stared at her, not with anger anymore, but with a dawning, horrified recognition. Who are you?" he finally whispered, the words barely audible. The woman reached into her small, elegant handbag and pulled out a simple, cream-colored business card. She didn't hand it to him. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, letting him, and anyone else who was looking, see the name embossed in stark black letters. She smiled that cool, lethal smile again. Quote, 50. The name Genevieve Dubois landed in the silent restaurant with the force of a physical blow. To the uninitiated, it might have meant nothing. But in the world of haute cuisine, it was a name whispered with a mixture of reverence and terror. The Global Culinary Review wasn't just a publication, it was the kingmaker, the destroyer of worlds. A rave review from Dubois could turn a humble bistro into an international destination overnight. A negative one could shutter a restaurant with a legacy spanning generations. She was the most powerful person in any restaurant she entered, and everyone, from the dishwasher to the head chef, knew it. Arthur Sterling certainly knew it. His face, which had been a canvas of rage and indignation, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The blustering tycoon, the man who thought he could buy and sell the world on a whim, looked at that small business card as if it were a death warrant. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, making a sound like a deflating balloon. The power dynamic in the room hadn't just shifted, it had been completely inverted. Quote, 51, my manager David breathed, his voice filled with awe. He looked from her to Sterling and then to me, his mind clearly struggling to process the cataclysmic turn of events. Genevieve Dubois lowered the card, her gaze still fixed on the rapidly crumbling billionaire. Quote, 52, she said, her voice crisp and clear. Quote, 53, She turned her head slightly, her eyes finding me where I stood frozen. Quote, 54, she said, gesturing towards me with a subtle nod. Quote, 55, She let her gaze sweep over him with undisguised contempt. Quote, 56, Sterling, stripped of his power and bravado, could only stammer. Quote, 57, quote, 58, Dubois finished for him, her tone sharp as broken glass. Quote, 59, She took a step closer to him, her voice dropping to a low, menacing purr. Quote, 60, Underscore, underscore, it was a complete and utter checkmate. Sterling stood there, utterly defeated, his entourage looking anywhere but at him. The silence was thick with his humiliation. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thick neck. Finally, he gave a jerky, almost spastic nod. He slowly turned to face me. The eyes that had been filled with such contempt minutes earlier were now darting around, unable to meet my own. "I apologize," he mumbled, the words sounding like they were being dragged from him with pliers. "For my behavior." "I believe the word you're looking for is sincerely," Genevieve Dubois prompted, her voice like ice. Sterling flinched. He took a deep breath and finally looked at me. "I sincerely apologize," he said, the words clear this time, though laced with the bitter taste of defeat. I simply nodded, too stunned to speak. David, seeing his chance, rushed forward. "Thank you, Madame Dubois, thank you. Sarah, you are of course not fired. Please take care of Mr. Sterling's table." But Dubois held up a hand. "No, I think Sarah has earned a break. And a promotion. I'm sure you can find another server for this table. Perhaps someone who can bring Mr. Sterling a glass of milk to soothe his temper." A few muffled snickers rippled through the restaurant. She then turned to me, a genuine warm smile finally reaching her eyes. "My dear, would you care to join me at my table? I was just about to order dessert, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the symbolism of Proust's Madeleine." Walking away from that table, leaving Arthur Sterling to stew in his public disgrace, felt like floating. I sat with Genevieve Dubois for the next hour, talking about French literature, food, and the absurdities of life. She was brilliant, witty, and kind. She told me she had been a waitress once, long ago, and had never forgotten the feeling of being made to feel small. As we talked, I saw Sterling and his party eat their meal in utter silence, finishing quickly and leaving without making eye contact with anyone. Before he left, he slid a thick envelope across the host's stand to David. The tip, I presumed. The next day, David promoted me to assistant manager. The following week, Genevieve's column came out. It didn't mention Sterling by name, referring to him only as a famously belligerent tech mogul, but it painted a vivid picture of the evening, praising Le Ciel Étoile for its superb cuisine and, more importantly, for its staff's quote underscore 69 underscore. The centerpiece of the review was a glowing tribute to a young waitress who quote underscore 70 underscore. The restaurant was booked solid for the next 6 months, and I, the literature student who just wanted to pay her rent, he had learned that sometimes the most powerful words aren't the ones that are shouted, but the ones spoken quietly with conviction, in a language the bully can't understand.